In thinking about this month's theme, letting go, my mind took an odd turn, perhaps. And what I considered was this. For some, no, really, for all of us, letting go is not always a matter of choice. In every life, there comes those inevitable moments when letting go is forced upon us. Some unexpected, sudden change rocks the boat of life we are living. In this case, I'm especially focused on the unwelcome changes that throw us a curveball. A change in the condition of our body by virtue of accident or disease, changes in relationships, especially their ending, a death, friend or family, and addressing our own impending mortality, and the innumerable other versions of change and loss, not unlike the stories we hear each week within our own church community, expressed as our sorrows. But for some, this forced letting go may constitute an extreme rupture, where the ground of our being is shaken out from under us, at least figuratively, if not literally, like the inhabitants of Nepal last year. Consider the abused child forced to let go of believing in the safety and protection within their own home and family. The soldier confronted with the terrible choices of war, to kill or be killed, fighting in a distant land and culture he does not understand, who knows not whether or who he can still trust. The young man of color forced, perhaps at an early age, to let go of, for some of us, conventional truth that the police are there to protect us, and him too. The family living in the hell of a war zone that one day is forced to let go of their home and country and walk away with nothing but the clothes on their bodies, uncertain whether and where they will find safe harbor. In a phone conversation with a friend this week, I was asked what I was doing, and I told her, actually, I'm composing a little sermon. And asked about the content, I said, I intend to talk about trauma. Ooh, was her response, as if she'd just seen a big spider in the corner. I don't like the word. It's too something, solid. I know, I responded, I don't much like it either. Funny how a mere word can engender such a response, I thought later. But here's the paradox. Well, I don't much like the word. It's not like I too haven't experienced my own share of sudden, difficult change and loss in this life. Anyway, so maybe today we can, in some measure at least, normalize trauma, break down its solidity. For starters, trauma, as I already noted, is an indivisible part of human existence. While it takes many forms, it spares no one. The DSM of mental problems defines trauma as the confrontation with actual or threatened death or serious injury. Another expanded definition describes the overarching impact of trauma. Any assault to the body or psyche that's so overwhelming that it cannot be integrated into consciousness. An event that shatters belief systems about life. The assumption that the self is sufficiently competent to act. That people are generally good, that the world has meaning and is predictable. Trauma breaches the unspoken contract we think we have with life, that if we do what we're supposed to do, we will survive. And the author Peter Levine, in talking about trauma, says, human beings have been designed over millennia through natural selection and social evolution to live with and move through extreme events and loss, and to process feelings of helplessness and terror without becoming stuck or traumatized. So, extreme events and losses are a regular part of life, and our bodies have the capacity to heal. If that's so, why do some people end up stuck in trauma, traumatized? There's a great body of growing literature within the academic and medical settings, especially related to PTSD, the disorder that trauma victims potentially carry. And just to sample a little of that literature, studies suggest that for one-time events, the vast majority, more than 80% of individuals, will be able to cope with a stressful experience in the long run, not develop post-traumatic disorder. The development of symptoms depends on a variety of factors and cannot be predicted by the nature of the event itself. Sometimes a seemingly benign circumstance can be traumatic, especially for a child who is sensitive to factors that others may not consider serious. An experience that would overwhelm one person might not affect another the same way. Much depends on predisposition, previous history, timing, and context. For example, rape survivors who get immediate support do not necessarily end up with long-term traumatic symptoms. Also, trauma can develop not from one single event, but from a prolonged atmosphere of neglect or inconsistent care. Judith Herman distinguished the consequences of simple trauma, a one-time event, from prolonged repeated trauma. After single trauma, survivors may say, I am not the same person I was before. After long-term trauma, they may say, I'm not a person. I don't exist. I'm nobody. After simple trauma, it's, I feel like I'm losing my mind. With complex trauma, it's, I've lost myself. But I'd like to take this discussion in another direction. What I'd like to do is talk briefly about the life of the Buddha and the cure he discovered for unresolved trauma. So, perhaps many of you are familiar with the legend of the Buddha's life, that at his birth, the seers told his father, who was the ruler of a small kingdom, that his son would either be a great king or a great saint. And his father, the king, was delighted at the prospect of his son succeeding him, but not so excited about the alternative. And so he went to extreme lengths to protect his son and shield him from life outside the palace, according to this legend, hoping to channel his life in that direction. But at the belated age of 29, the son had had enough. and had a propitious encounter with what are called the heavenly messengers, when one day he sought out his servant to take him out beyond the palace walls, and there he encountered, supposedly for the first time, an aged person, a sick person, and a corpse at the burning ghats. He also met a wandering monk living the homeless life that day. These encounters were pivotal in redirecting his life and launching him on his own quest to answer root questions about the human condition, about suffering, its cause, and the pathway to dealing effectively with suffering, to produce its cessation. But this oft-told legend leaves out a very important, a critical piece of the Buddha's story that is seldom told. And that is that his mother died a week after giving birth to her son. And the Buddha was nurtured and raised by his mother's sister, who became his stepmother. But his life, whether he knew it or not at that young age, was marked by the trauma of this early loss, what is described by some in the psych world as his primitive agony. And a more penetrative look at his life and quest hinges on this formative experience. Interestingly, what's often focused on when the story of his 7 years wandering in search of answers is retold are the years of self-deprivation, where he put himself through great austerities of the body, including almost starving himself to death. But let's return to the problem of trauma. How can unbearable experience be born? A common phenomenon associated with traumatic experience is for the victim to cut off from that which it cannot bear. The shocked self is sacrificed, sent into its room for an endless time out. It is shunned, split off, shut away because the feelings associated with the experience are just too painful and raw to deal with, especially feelings of shame and self-hatred when the victim takes responsibility for the event. This fragmenting and shutting away of a part of oneself as a defensive strategy is called dissociation in modern psych jargon, and it may work for a while, but at great cost. At the cost of being whole again. Picking up again with our Buddha to be, for years he wandered in search of answers, essentially looking for his own path to healing, his own developmental trauma. In his search, he visited all the great teachers of his time and learned all the practices they knew and could teach. Then, as we have said, he put himself through the rigor of great austerities. But all of these practices were not getting him where he needed to go. In fact, in a sense, they were an outward manifestation of his own dissociated state, cut off from the painful feelings related to his great loss at infancy. One might interpret this period, his period of self-deprivation, in fact, as born out of some core belief of unworthiness related to his mother's death. Perhaps an unspoken question related to his loss internalized in his being was whether he deserved to be nurtured, even whether he deserved sustenance. Maybe he should just tough it out and deprive himself some more. But here he reached a dead end. And it is at this moment that he had another pivotal encounter. And this time, it was in the form of a memory. A memory from early childhood when he's laying in a basket under the shade of a beautiful tree, a rose apple tree, and he remembers a quality of being held by the earth, then as his mother, and protected by the tree, and feeling the bliss of peace. The memory serves as a catalyst that causes a great turning in his journey as he reevaluates the path he's on and redirects himself. What he realizes in that moment is that what he is seeking to find again is that state that he recalls as an infant under the nurturing shade of the tree when all was at peace. And this leads him to give up his self-denying, self-depriving ways and to nurture himself back to strength. Interestingly, at this moment, he has an encounter, according to another legend, with a young milkmaid who brings him yogurt. And he has not eaten for many days, and he nurtures himself back to strength with the yogurt that this woman brings him. In some way, she represents the mother he has lost. And coming back to strength of body, he is enabled to push himself to his final effort to awaken. And the psychiatrist Mark Epstein has written a wonderful book I've just been reading, The Trauma of Everyday Life, wherein he revisits the Buddha's path to awakening. And what he highlights in this book is the Buddha's discovery of a way not around, but through to healing. And the critical piece that the Buddha discovered was a way to reincorporate the put-away feelings of his childhood trauma, the loss of his mother after the feelings that were born of the loss of his mother after he was born. And the way through to enabling reincorporation was to bit by bit, gradually over time, allow the feelings of loss to come back into his consciousness, to come back into the field of awareness in meditation until he was whole again. And this is the approach he then left to us as his legacy, the practice of mindfulness. So mindfulness, the most prosaic of words. But what does it mean to be mindful? Everybody's doing it, even Unitarians. But what are our notions of what constitutes mindfulness? And why might this approach be an appropriate vehicle for healing the profound wounds of trauma, as the psych world is now telling us? Being mindful in the sense that the Buddha taught us has all those ingredients and perhaps a few others, and I will go through them again. First, paying attention, being aware of whatever is happening in this mind and body is what mindfulness, being mindful, opens us to. Putting away judgment, allowing everything one experiences to be just as it is, without needing to change it or fix it. And this is especially true for our feelings, which may be the most difficult quantity to deal with at given moments. And the Buddha was reductionist in his thinking. He reduced it down to noticing what was pleasant when you felt pleasantness, and what was unpleasant or painful when you noticed that, and what was neutral. And this is a hinge point in practice, really tuning into feelings, because feelings are where we trip out, because they engender painful thoughts associated with them, and the next thing you know, we're spun out in some tape and gone, lost. So the technique that the Buddha advocated of noting the quality of a feeling, reducing it down to its bare simplicity of pleasant or painful, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, is very helpful in not getting carried away, pulled away into the stories, the content associated with the feelings. There's a very maternal or feminine quality to mindfulness too, and that is in its receptive nature. It can hold whatever comes. In a sense, we are remothering ourselves when we're being completely present with our feelings. We are reincorporating all the difficult, old, dissociated parts of ourselves, turning nothing away. And it's this reincorporation of the fragmented parts of ourselves that brings us back to wholeness. There's a word for mindfulness in the Buddha's language, which is sati. And sati means remembering. And I love the word remembering, because if you break it apart, it's remembering. It's bringing the pieces, the fragmented pieces, back together. I want to close by reading a piece here by an activist lawyer, Brian Stevenson, who you may have heard of. Maybe even somebody's talked about him here. He works with and defends persons on death row. And he writes, "We are all broken by something. We have all hurt someone and have been hurt. We all share the condition of brokenness, even if our brokenness is not equivalent. I desperately wanted mercy for Jimmy Dill and would have done anything to create justice for him, but I couldn't pretend that his struggle was disconnected from my own. The ways in which I have been hurt and have hurt others are different in the ways Jimmy Dill suffered and caused suffering, but our shared brokenness connected us. Paul Farmer, the renowned physician, who has spent his lifetime trying to cure the world's sickest and poorest people, once quoted me something that the writer Thomas Merton said. We are bodies of broken bones. I guess I'd always known, but never fully considered, that being broken is what makes us human. We all have our reasons. Sometimes we're fractured by the choices we make. Sometimes we're shattered by things we would never have chosen. But our brokenness is also the source of our common humanity, the basis for our shared search for comfort, meaning, and healing. Our shared vulnerability and imperfection nurtures and sustains our capacity for compassion. We have a choice. We can embrace our humanness, which means embracing our broken natures and the compassion that remains hope for healing, or we can deny our brokenness, forswear compassion, and as a result, deny our own humanity. I thought of the guards strapping Jimmy Dill to the gurney that very hour. I thought of the people who would cheer his death and see it as some kind of victory. I realized they were broken people too, even if they would never admit it. So many of us have become afraid and angry. We've become so fearful and vengeful that we've thrown away children, discarded the disabled, and sanctioned the imprisonment of the sick and the weak. Not because they are a threat to public safety or beyond rehabilitation, but because we think it makes us seem tough, less broken. I thought of the victims of violent crime and the survivors of murdered loved ones, and how we've pressured them to recycle their pain and anguish, re-traumatize themselves, one might say, and give it back to the offenders we prosecute. I thought of the many ways we've legalized vengeful and cruel punishments, how we've allowed our victimization to justify victimizing others. We have submitted to the harsh instinct to crush those among us whose brokenness is most visible. But simply punishing the broken, walking away from them, or hiding them from sight only ensures that they remain broken, and we do too. There is no wholeness outside of our reciprocal humanity. There is no wholeness outside of our reciprocal humanity. May it be so. Thank you.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.